Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this CSS tutorial on creating a very basic site layout. Now in this part of the CSS series we're not going to focus on creating something that's aesthetically good looking. What we're trying to do is we're really trying to nail the basics of laying out our site, floating things, and the main thing is we're not using old style table based layouts here. So if you look at this site layout that I've just written up, we've got a header area here with a logo, we've got a navigation area, we've got a main content area, we've got a side area and then a footer. So everything is very grid-like. We have these sort of areas that we work within. However, we need to be able to float this right and float this left and make sure we have this as an unordered list rather than lots of divs or table cells. So really what we're trying to do is look at the markup just as well as the styling, because obviously without the markup you wouldn't have anything to style. So it is important to look at the markup as well and establish how you're going to create a layout. That's one of the parts of web design. So it's important to, as you're styling, understand the markup that you're using as well. So this is what we're going to aim to be creating. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start to write this out. Okay, so we're going to start, writing up our markup first. We're going to start, as we have with all of the other tutorials. We have, just a standard page. We've got our style sheet, which has nothing in it at the moment linked in, and we've got our body area. So we're going to start from scratch. We've got nothing on our page at the moment. We've got our browser open and we also have our element inspector open, and this is going to be really useful for playing around with styles while we're developing, which is another thing that you should get used to doing. So let's go ahead and start to establish how we're going to lay this out. We need to look at this visually. We can't just go and start writing out content areas like divs for headers and stuff and content before we establish an overall size for our main container, etc. Now I'm not going to be using newer elements like header, article, content. I'm just going to be using divs, and the main reason for this is, first of all, browser compatibility with Internet Explorer. Second of all, is I know it's more semantic, but it does just confuse things when we're styling. There's nothing wrong with just creating containers and giving them names like header, footer, but I'm just going to keep it as basic as possible, and it's just going to allow us to focus more on the styling rather than the elements themselves and confuse everything. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create an overall container for our site, and this isn't going to have a background color. We're not going to add any effects to it. It's essentially going to serve as a main container for our site, and I'm going to call this wrap. So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to give this an ID of wrap. So everything that we create, from our header to our menu, our content, our side and our footer, is going to go within this wrap. And essentially all this is going to do is wrap the content within a specific width. Okay, and we're going to float this wrap in the middle of the page. Not float it, but we're going to position it in the middle of the page or the center of the page. And this means that anything we create inside of it will also be central. So let's go ahead and start to style this, and we'll take a look at getting this in the center of the page, giving it a width. But we're going to give it a background color as well, and this is just to see where it's at. Before I do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a overall font size, or an overall font. So I'm going to have a font of 0.8 EM. I'm going to choose Arial, and my backup is going to be sans serif, so any sans serif font, and that's it. That's all I'm going to do in terms of the body. So now if I was to just place some text in there and refresh, we have an Arial font here. Okay, so inside of this wrap, what do we want to do? Well, I'll actually leave that in there. Let's go ahead and start to style this. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set the background to #CCC, and that's just going to allow us to see it while we're styling it. And you can see that it spanned the entire width of the page. We've got no padding, anything like that, no specific sizing. So let's go ahead and give it a width of 960 pixels. And let's go ahead and give it some inner padding of 10 pixels. Now this will actually increase the overall width of the container because we're giving it a padding. We can either use box sizing, but I'm just going to reduce the width value. So 10 times 2 on the width of this container would, 10 left and 10 right would be 20. So I'm going to give this a size of 940. So the overall size will now be 960. Let's go ahead and refresh. Okay, so if I inspect this, you can see that the little yellow speech bubble at the bottom says 960, which is fine. We're not too worried about the height because that's going to, expand with any content that we add, and that might be dynamic. So let's go ahead now and center this. So all we need to say is margin 0 auto. Another thing to mention about this design is it's not going to be responsive. We're not going to be using percentages. So as we resize our browser, everything's going to stay the same size. It's too complicated to get into responsive in one tutorial that's going to be long enough anyway. So we've got this design now, we've got the padding. We've got some text in there, but we're going to be removing this. So we now know that we've got this overall container. So let's go ahead and we'll leave the background color in for now, just so we can see where everything is. But let's go ahead and start to create more markup before we return to our styles. So we want to sort of establish what we want on the page before we start to style it and position it. Obviously, the order of the elements is important as well. But let's go ahead and create our header, our menu, our main area for our content, and our footer, and let's just place some text in there so we can see where it sits on the page as well. So I'm going to create a div with an ID of header. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a div with an ID of menu. We're going to have the menu sit under the header. You could have the menu within the header. It's entirely up to you. If you're uncomfortable with, modifying anything that I'm doing, then maybe after the tutorial, if you play around, you might, start to feel comfortable with it. I'm going to create a main area, and then I'm going to create a footer. Okay, so we've got a header, a menu, a main area, and then a footer. The main area is where the main content area is going to go, and then the sidebar at the side as well. So let's pull these down just to give it some room and make it look slightly neater. Now within the header, I want an area for the logo. I'm not going to add a menu in the header or anything else, but there is potentially room to add more. So I'm going to create a div with an ID of logo. Now we don't have to have this extra container. Now within here, I'm going to add an H1, for example, and I'm just going to say our website. Now what we could do is we could just have an H1 and give this an ID of logo, but the reason I'm doing it within a div is I might say in the future want to come and add sort of some kind of text down here as a slogan or something like that. So it's best to keep it within a main container, and that's just going to allow us to keep this easy to edit in the future. So we've created our logo in there. It's just a H1. We're not going to do much to this. We're going to change some default padding and margin on that a bit later. Now let's go ahead and look at what we're going to do with the menu. Well, the menu is going to be an unordered list. So we're going to create an unordered list, and we're going to create several list items within this unordered list. This might seem odd, but it's the best way to create some kind of menu, because really what we're doing is we're saying to a browser, well, this is a list of items, which a menu is. We want our browser to interpret this, or screen readers for people that perhaps can't actually see the page, to render this as a list of items. It's going to make it a lot easier for everyone. Now within each of the LIs, we're going to have an anchor tag, and that's just going to have a link and some text. For now, I'm going to just put it as a hash because we're not actually linking through to anything. We're just creating the overall template. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy and paste this down. So let's have 4 menu items. The second one I'm going to say about us. and I'm going to say contact us, and then tell a friend. Now I'm also going to add a class to one of these of selected, and the reason I'm doing this is because within the menu I want a state that is selected. So you might have seen in the, well, you probably would have seen in the first part of the tutorial, we had one of the menu items was constantly black with white text, and if you missed that, go back to it now. But essentially what this allows us to do is, whichever page that we're on, perhaps server-side processing might allow us to add a class, well, should allow us to add a class to the current page. You know, and it's not necessary to do so, but it just makes it a lot easier for the user to see where they are. So I'm going to add this class in now. It's not going to do anything for now. In fact, our menu is going to look a complete mess, but later on we'll be able to style this so, you know, the user can tell which page that they're on. Okay, so let's go ahead and preview this in our browser. You can just see it's an unordered list. We've got bullet points, we've got links in there with the default purple text. It's not looking great at the moment, but you know, this is why we're going to style it up. So in the next part we're going to create the main content area, and then we'll just add some text to the footer. We're not going to focus on this too much, but the main content area, the menu, are the main parts that we can, you know, really utilize styles within. So that will be in the next part.